Hello, I'm Courtney, and in today's lesson I wanted to take you outside to beautiful Florida and talk to you about the most common mistakes I see in advanced English speakers. So I've noticed that all of my students tend to make the same mistakes despite their language background, even despite some level variations. They're all pretty intermediate advanced students. They're just all making the same mistakes. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I have my list here. The very first one on the list is syntax errors. So syntax error simply means that some word is placed in the incorrect position within a sentence. So oftentimes this will show up with adverbs, especially frequency adverbs. So an example of this that my student just made today was, we're all the time going out for coffee. Instead of saying, we're going out for coffee all the time. So normally with adverbs of frequency, they will come at the end of a sentence, but they'll sometimes come in other positions within a sentence depending on which word it is and in the context. But this is one of the biggest errors I see, is just with adverbs. So there's a bunch of different types of adverbs, and they all typically take different places in a sentence. And I'm going to put up a list here now on the screen so that you guys can have a look at the different types of adverbs, some examples, and where they would go in a sentence. Another issue that I commonly see is issues with phrasal verbs. So the person will oftentimes say the incorrect preposition in a phrasal verb. And this is hard because you really just have to learn them one by one. There's no easy fix for phrasal verbs. So for example, turned into, that's a phrasal verb, to turn into something. So if you turn, it's like this. I just turned around. But if I turn into something, that would mean maybe if I, as a human, became a vampire, I turned into a vampire. So you guys all know what phrasal verbs already are, likely if you're watching this channel. And the real issue is coming up with that preposition after, because that preposition can change and have different meanings. And so basically you just have to learn them one by one, and I'll give you guys some videos about phrasal verbs on this channel so that you can start to do that. Another issue that my students make are with questions that they turn into declarative statements. So they'll just take something that is in a dialogue, maybe they're asking themselves a question, and then they switch the words around but still use a question word like what, and they switch the other words around to make it a declarative statement. And I've seen this a lot, especially this past year. So an example of this would be how long you have been there instead of how long have you been there. And I'm sorry for the noise, my dog is actually here with me and she's just walking around in the woods. Come here, Luna. Come here, say hi. So here's Looney. We're just out here today going for a little bit of a walk, and I wanted to take you guys with us because it's so beautiful here in Florida in the summer. I can't believe this is January and it's like 70 something, 80 degrees outside, which is weird that I'm wearing a sweater, but you know. So yeah, so she's just making a little bit of noise. I'm sorry about that. So another common error that I see is that people will often omit the plural s when they're talking about one of something, especially whenever that something is a plural. So for example, one of my colleague. This is an error that people make a lot. It should be one of my colleagues because you're taking one of a group. So a group of many colleagues, that has to be more than one. You can't take one of one. So you're taking one of a group of something. So that needs to have an s at the end. So one of my friends, s. This comes in different word formations as well. You could say all kinds of things. So because things is plural at the end there, kinds has to be plural as well. If you change the word order up a little bit to sort, all sorts of things, they would also have to have an s because of that things is plural. A scenario in which you don't need the s would be when you want to have something singular at the end. So this type of person is singular, so you don't need to say types. But if you want to say people, these types of people. So whenever the thing at the end, the noun at the end is singular, the word in the middle is going to be singular as well. Another error that my students often make is they'll put a preposition after a verb that doesn't take one. A few verbs like this are to tell, or to access, or to help. So for example, he told to me the homework. That would be incorrect. He told me the homework. But that's an error that I keep hearing again and again with my students. Or like I said, the word access. He accesses to the garage. No, he accesses the garage. There would not be a to there. And now going off of the word make, another error that my students make is confusing make and take when it comes to a decision. So you make a decision, you don't take a decision. You make up your mind and you make the decision. Make. Just remember that. Hear that over and over again. It's not take. I've heard this so much, even in super native sounding speakers. This is probably the number one mistake I hear everyone make. It's make a decision, not take a decision. Another mistake that my students make is a word mix-up between remember and remind. So when you remember something, you're thinking back on the event, how good or how bad it was, exactly what happened, that's what you're thinking about. But if you tell someone to remind you of something, then you're asking them to bring up an event or bring up some idea that you need to do later on. For example, can you remind me to call the doctor at 3 p.m. to schedule an appointment for me and Luna? I don't know why a doctor would see Luna, that would be a vet. Or you can tell your friend, can you remember that time that we went to Disney World together? It was so much fun. I'm so glad that we did that. We should do that again sometime. So asking your friend to remember an event that you spent together versus asking them to remind you to do something later on. So those are two completely different words, even though they sound sort of similar. The very last issue that I commonly see is issues with person and people. I'm not sure why this happens because it's really quite simple, even for advanced speakers to be making this mistake is surprising, but actually all of them tend to do that. So normally they will use person or people correct in the sentence. However, they'll conjugate the verb in the sentence wrong. They'll say people is funny instead of people are funny. So that's something to be aware of, is especially when there's a bunch of words in between the subject and the verb, be aware of how you're conjugating that after the word people and person. Okay, so that's all of the mistakes that my students tend to make. I'm sure there's a bunch more that will come up. Some that I didn't mention that take much longer explanations, I'll have videos specifically for those mistakes and explaining them in full detail. And let me know if you guys like this kind of backdrop, this casual outside experience. I certainly do, because it's such a beautiful day. Subscribe to this channel. You guys here next week. Bye!